Hi, it's Eva here at Breva Creative, and today we are going to be making some stained glass. Brad and I are going to be making a stained glass project together, and you get to watch. So full disclosure, we have done this a couple of times before, maybe 3 or 4 times, not a ton. We are definitely not experts, but I think it turned out really, really well for beginners, and that is why you should try it, because it's a very approachable hobby. It's a tiny bit expensive because glass in general is expensive, but it's definitely one of the cheaper ways to get into glass. So give it a shot and let us know how it goes. But first, watch how we do.
Okay, to start off this mess, you're gonna need some stuff. Glass, of course. Glass has gotten really expensive lately, but you can still find some at various craft stores. A glass cutter tool, we have 2 types. This grippy one is kind of a beginner type that helps give you better control. We also have this pen style one, and that works pretty well too. Safety glasses for pretty much every step in this process. Sticky foil copper. The wider variety is easier for beginners, but your solder lines will be larger, so do what you want. Sharpies, silver for dark color glass and black for light color glass. We also have a secret alternative use for these Sharpies that is a great way to save some money, so stay tuned. And you can't make any stained glass without solder. We're using 50/50 solder, we'll explain what that means later on. Soldering iron. This is so important. We tried stained glass with an inferior iron and it was miserable. Make sure yours is a 100-watt with a larger tip. Trust me, just throw those cheapo 40-watt soldering irons out a window. There are also a couple of solutions that you need to buy as well. Flux just helps keep the solder adhered to the copper foil, and as you'll see later on, this bottle is just a patina for the solder that we use at the end. And pliers. These are glass breaking pliers and really help you out when you're breaking glass. Imagine that. And not featured yet and not mandatory is a special grinder. Stay tuned to see ours. So here's the totals. Stained glass is definitely not a cheap hobby, especially with the prices of glass recently. But we really wanted to try this out and it was totally worth it. I think the full total, not including the $100 grinder, is around 120 bucks. So before you get started, you always want to add some oil to your glass cutter. This makes your cut smoother and keeps mini shards from flying all over the place. They'll try to sell you like a special oil for this, but in reality you can use just about any sort of oily substance. We're using vegetable oil here. Well, now that we are all lubed up, we can get cutting. We sketched out this really simple pattern in Sharpie. It helps to label piece numbers and colors just to keep everything in the right order. Then we're going to cut all of our shapes out. If we really cared about the final size of this piece, we would make a photocopy before cutting it so that we could use that as a size reference, but we're not going to do that this time. So as you can see, we're just tracing the shapes onto the glass with Sharpie. It's best practice to start with the centerpieces and work your way out. We're going to give this glass a nice score, and then you're going to want to apply enough pressure that you hear like a slight ripping noise. Then give it a couple taps with your pliers and loosen up the score, and just snap it off. You want to make sure that your score is continuous from one side to the other, and you don't need to get the perfect score cut on the first try. Sometimes, especially with tight curves, it's easier to break off a piece at a time instead. And that's exactly what we're doing on this sun piece. And don't worry if the cut isn't perfect if you have a grinder, because that grinder can help cover a multitude of sins in the cutting phase. We're just cleaning this piece up a little bit, and again, these pieces with tight curves are definitely the hardest to get right. So if you're new to this, maybe start off by making some straight cuts and just practicing until you get the hang of it. And there we go, piece number 1 is cut out. Skip forward to a montage of us cutting out the rest of the pieces. And here is our cute little sunset all ready to be grinded. Okay, it is time to open our grinder account. Not the one you're thinking of though. So we picked up this little guy at Hobby Lobby. Works great so far. All it is a diamond bit for grinding down the edges of your glass. You need to add some water to keep the bit from wearing down, and the little puffy white thing on top is just a sponge to collect all the mini glass shards. You definitely need some safety glasses for this one. We're going to hold the glass by the face at first and hit every edge with the grinder before trying to get the pieces to fit together better. This helps give the glass a dull, flat edge that the copper foil will adhere to better. And if you don't want to buy one of these quite yet, you really don't need to right away. You can get away with using just sandpaper on the edges if you're just starting out. But the final piece may not be as structurally sturdy without it. You may see some lifting on the copper foil, and your soldering lines may not be as even as they could be without it. So yeah, this grinder just takes some practice. You don't want to press the glass too hard into it, just nice even pushes and keep the piece moving to avoid indentations. The better the glass fits together, the more even your solder lines will be.
Once you have all of your glass ground, you want to give it a quick rinse off to make sure there's no dusty glass on there. But then you're going to dry it and you're going to wrap it with this copper foil. So you want to get the glass centered along the middle of that foil so that there's even gaps on both edges, or even overhang of the tape on both edges. And you're just going to wrap that one side at a time all the way around the glass. Make sure it's nice and snug. And you just want to get that the center bit attached first. And once you have it all attached, then you're going to press down the sides. So I'm just wrapping this around. I want it to overhang or overlap itself about 1/4 inch at the end, and then I'm just going to use my nails and my fingers to slowly, one side at a time, fold those sides over each other until the edges of the glass are fully wrapped in this copper foil. Once that's done, you're going to go over it really quick with the side of that Sharpie. That's our magical use for a Sharpie. You can buy a burnisher tool for super expensive, but a Sharpie actually works incredibly well for this. So don't go buy the expensive tool. What you're doing here is just pressing that copper down so that it is nice and smooth and tight against the glass. And once you wrap everything, you're going to go and put everything together, and we're going to start soldering. So you're going to take some flux and you're just going to run over with a paintbrush and the flux. You're going to run over the copper, especially at intersection points. We're going to tack it together at intersection points before pulling the solder over all of the copper. So this is just to hold it together and make sure your piece is where you want it to be before you go and make it all pretty in a place that you don't want it to be. So you want to put your solder down and your soldering iron down pretty much at the same time. But you definitely want to pick your solder up before the soldering iron, because if you pick the iron up first, your solder will stick and it will make a mess. So don't do that. But just do little dots of solder with the soldering iron at kind of intersection points, or just kind of along the line to tack everything together, just so that it's in the shape that you want it to be. And this will hold it pretty well so that you can go over and run a bead of solder across the whole line and make it nice and pretty. And if things aren't sticking correctly, then you probably don't have enough flux. The flux is what actually allows the solder and the copper to stick to each other. So if there's a point where the solder isn't laying down correctly, you're probably just missing a bit of flux. So just go over it again and try again, and it probably will fix your problems. So now we're just going to go back over all of those lines with our solder and fully cover them so that they're nice and pretty and have a nice kind of smooth bead on there. It might take a couple passes to get a smooth look to it, but it's not a big deal, honestly. If it's a little messy, we're gonna blacken it later so you hardly even notice the solder lines. It's really just about the glass, this whole process. And side note, this is lead, so be careful. It's not super dangerous, but don't stick it in your mouth, and wash your hands after. You should be pretty safe if you do that, but solder is half lead, so just caution. So once you're done with the front side, flip it over and do the back, and then you're going to want to do the edges. And with the edges, you don't want a whole bead of solder, you just want to kind of tin them, just kind of coat them with a light coating of that silver. This is just to protect the copper from tarnish and give it a cohesive look. In the end, you are probably going to give this a frame though.
The very last step here is to apply a patina to the solder. You can get this stuff in a variety of colors, and the patina will happen over time anyways. This is just quickening the process. We like black personally because it makes the solder lines disappear nicely when you hold it up to the light. Also, I should mention this stuff is extremely poisonous, so wash your hands after this step and after touching the lead solder as well. Now spray some Windex on it and you are good to go. And what's stained glass without a little backlighting? So we got our beautiful little ocean view sunset and got the sand dunes in front, and I think it turned out so good. We'll probably make a little wooden frame for this guy and hang it in a window. And just to show y'all how easy stained glass can be to pick up, these two pieces were our third attempt at it. Granted, these took a long time, but man did they turn out nice. So yeah, go try it out. And hey, if you don't want to buy all the equipment, maybe look into taking a local community class or something. That's how we got started, and we just fell in love with it.
So, how do you think we did? Please comment below how you think this went, and let us know if you give it a try. Tag us at Breva Creative, and as always, like and subscribe and help us grow our channel. Thank y'all. Bye!